The contract slid across the table like a death sentence to my marriage. $750,000 and a divorce. My father-in-law smiled, unaware I owned 52% of his pharma empire, and his legacy was already mine. The envelope landed on the table with a sound that would change everything. Inside was a check for $750,000, and my father-in-law, James Montgomery, was grinning like he'd just solved the biggest problem of his life with one signature. What he didn't realize was that the man sitting across from him, the one he was trying to buy off like some gold-digging nobody, controlled 52% of his entire pharmaceutical empire. My name is Daniel Carter, and this is the story of how I watched my wife's family try to destroy me while I quietly held their financial future in my hands. For 4 years, I'd been married to Sarah Montgomery, the only daughter of one of Boston's most successful pharmaceutical executives. And for 4 years, I'd let her family believe I was nothing more than a struggling research chemist who'd somehow convinced their precious daughter to marry below her station. The truth was far more complex. The truth was that I owned enough shares in Montgomery Pharmaceuticals to remove James from his CEO position with a single shareholder vote. But I'd stayed silent, watching, waiting to see who these people really were when they thought no one was keeping score. The dinner invitation arrived on a Monday afternoon. Sarah forwarded me an email from her mother, Patricia. Dinner this Saturday. Just family. Very important matter to discuss. I knew exactly what important matter meant in Montgomery family vocabulary. It meant James had decided it was time to address the embarrassment of his daughter's marriage to someone who drove an 8-year-old Subaru and lived in a modest townhouse in a neighborhood his chauffeur wouldn't visit. Should be interesting, I said, already calculating how this evening might unfold. Sarah set down her coffee mug harder than necessary. Daniel, maybe we should skip this one. When my parents use that tone, they're usually planning something terrible. She wasn't wrong. In our 4 years of marriage, James and Patricia had made their disapproval abundantly clear through countless small cruelties. The way Patricia would mention Sarah's ex-boyfriend, Brandon, who now ran a venture capital firm. The way James would discuss successful young executives in his industry, always making sure I understood I wasn't one of them. The carefully orchestrated family gatherings where I'd be seated with the teenagers while Sarah's cousins, all properly credentialed and appropriately wealthy, discussed business with the adults. We're going, I said firmly. I want to see exactly what they're planning. What Sarah didn't know, what nobody except my attorney and financial team knew, was that Daniel Carter, the unremarkable research chemist, was also DC Capital Holdings, the anonymous investment entity that had been steadily acquiring Montgomery Pharmaceutical stock for the past 9 years. It started when I was 23, fresh out of Stanford with a degree in biochemical engineering and a modest inheritance from my uncle, who'd made a fortune in tech. Most people would have bought a sports car or traveled the world. I bought stock in a struggling pharmaceutical company run by a man named James Montgomery, who was drowning in debt from failed drug trials and poor market timing during the 2011 biotech crash. I'd studied Montgomery's company for months before making my first purchase. His research pipeline was solid, his patents were valuable, but his capital management was a disaster. He needed money desperately, and his existing investors were losing confidence. So I started buying quietly, through layers of corporate entities that couldn't be traced back to me. Within 4 years, I owned 18% of his company. By the time I met Sarah at a medical research conference 6 years ago, I owned 35%. By the time we got married, I owned 46%. Today, I owned 52%, making me the controlling shareholder of Montgomery Pharmaceuticals. James Montgomery worked for me. He just didn't know it. Meeting Sarah hadn't been part of any plan. I'd gone to that conference to present research findings for a client. Sarah was there representing her nonprofit that funded cancer research. We'd both ended up at the hotel bar simultaneously, both trying to escape tedious networking events. She made me laugh with her brutally honest assessment of pharmaceutical industry politics. I made her laugh by admitting I had no idea how to tie a bow tie properly for the gala dinner. We talked until 3 a.m., and when she gave me her number, she warned me, "Fair warning, my family's obsessed with status and money and all that superficial garbage. If that's going to be a problem, we should probably just call this a night." I'd smiled and said the truest thing I could without revealing everything. Money doesn't define a person's worth. Character does. 4 months later, I proposed. 7 months after that, we were married in a small ceremony that Patricia had desperately tried to transform into a society wedding. Sarah shut that down, choosing instead an intimate celebration with 75 people who actually mattered to us. James had given a toast that barely masked his disappointment that his only daughter had married so far beneath her potential. I'd smiled through it, knowing that the man making jokes about my humble profession was only able to afford that wedding because of capital infusions from my investment fund over the past 6 years. The game I was playing was dangerous, I knew that. Every month Sarah would stress about finances in ways that weren't necessary. Our townhouse was nice, but she'd grown up in an estate. Our vacations were domestic road trips because I couldn't explain how we could afford European getaways on a research chemist's salary. She'd adapted better than I'd expected, never complaining, always insisting that being together mattered more than the lifestyle her parents had provided. But I could see the strain, especially during family gatherings, when Patricia would make pointed comments about Sarah's new reality. "Why do you let them treat you like this?" Sarah asked me once, after a particularly brutal Thanksgiving, where James had spent 30 minutes explaining pharmaceutical market dynamics to me, as if I didn't understand every aspect of his business better than he did. "Because your father's opinion doesn't define who I am," I'd told her, "and because the most powerful people in any room are usually the ones everyone's overlooking." Saturday arrived with the kind of cold November weather that made Boston feel especially unwelcoming. Sarah spent over an hour getting ready, changing outfits 3 times before settling on something that balanced respecting her parents' formality without trying too hard. I wore khakis and a button-down the uniform of acceptable mediocrity that James expected from me. The Montgomery estate sat on 5 acres in Brooklyn, a monument to pharmaceutical wealth that always felt more like a corporate headquarters than a home. The circular driveway curved through meticulously maintained gardens before depositing visitors at an entrance that belonged in a European manner. Sarah's hand found mine as we approached the door. "Whatever they're planning," she said quietly, "remember that I chose you. Nothing they say changes that." Patricia answered the door herself, which was unusual. Normally their house manager would handle such tasks. "Sarah, darling," she said, embracing her daughter with the kind of careful affection that wouldn't disturb her jewelry. "Daniel." My name sounded like an afterthought. The dining room was set for 4, but the formality suggested something far more significant than a casual family dinner. Crystal stemware, china that probably cost more than my annual salary, and enough silverware to confuse anyone who hadn't grown up knowing which fork served which purpose. James was already seated at the head of the table, wearing a 3-piece suit despite being in his own home. That was James always performing, always reminding everyone of his position. "Daniel," he said, standing to shake my hand with the aggressive grip of a man establishing dominance. "Good of you to make time for us." As if I'd been given a choice. The first course arrived and conversation stayed carefully neutral. Patricia asked Sarah about her work at the Research Foundation. James mentioned a new drug in Phase 3 trials. I played my role perfectly, asking just enough questions to seem engaged, but not so many that I might appear knowledgeable about the pharmaceutical industry I secretly dominated. Then, as dessert was being served, James pulled out a leather portfolio, the kind lawyers use, the kind that meant serious business. "Daniel," he began, his voice taking on the boardroom tone I'd heard in countless shareholder calls. "Patricia and I wanted to discuss something that affects Sarah's future significantly." Sarah's hand found mine under the table, gripping tightly. She'd seen this coming. "We've been thinking extensively about Sarah's well-being," Patricia added, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "She sacrificed so much when she married you, her lifestyle, her social position, her opportunities." I felt Sarah stiffen beside me. "Mom, we've discussed this repeatedly." "Let us finish, sweetheart," James said, raising a hand. "We're not here to criticize. We're here to provide a solution." He opened the portfolio, revealing a stack of legal documents and prominently displayed a check. Even from across the table, I could see it was substantial. "Daniel, I'll be direct because I respect directness in business. You seem like a decent enough young man, but let's acknowledge reality. You married significantly above your station. That's not an insult, it's simply fact. Sarah could have married anyone. She chose you, and we've attempted to accept that decision. But, Victoria continued, we cannot stand by watching our daughter struggle financially because of misplaced pride or romantic idealism. We've developed a solution that benefits everyone. James slid the portfolio across the table. Inside was a divorce agreement, and clipped prominently was a check for $750,000. This represents more money than you'd earn in 15 years at your current position, James said, his voice carrying the absolute confidence of a man who'd never been refused by anyone he considered beneath him. Sign the divorce papers, take this money, and move forward with your life. You'll be better off than before you met Sarah, and Sarah can move on to a life more appropriate to her background and potential. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah looked like she'd been physically struck. Patricia was examining her manicure, apparently considering this matter already settled. James was smiling slightly, the smile of a man who'd just solved a problem with the elegant application of capital. I looked at the check. $750,000. To James Montgomery, this was probably pocket change. To the person he believed I was, it represented life-changing opportunity. And that was the beautiful irony of this moment. The man offering me $750,000 to abandon his daughter was only able to make that offer because of the billions I'd pumped into his failing company over the past 9 years. That's a remarkably generous offer, I said finally, keeping my voice carefully neutral. James's smile widened. I thought you'd see reason. Just so I understand correctly, I continued, picking up the check and examining it. You want me to sign away my marriage to Sarah for $750,000? It's a divorce, not an abandonment, Patricia corrected. Clean, efficient, civilized. Just a mutual acknowledgement that this marriage was a mistake from the beginning. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. This is absolutely insane. You can't just purchase people. Sweetheart, sit down, James said dismissively. The adults are having a conversation. I'm 29 years old, Dad. I'm an adult, and my husband is sitting here being offered money to leave me. How dare you? But James wasn't even looking at her. He was watching me, confident he'd already won. Nathan understands how the real world operates. Don't you, Daniel? Sometimes money is simply the most honest way to resolve a problem. I set the check down carefully, smoothing it against the tablecloth. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Before I respond, I said, I need to make a quick call. Would you excuse me for just a moment? Daniel, what are you doing? Sarah asked, confused. Making certain everyone at this table understands the complete picture, I replied. I dialed my attorney, Marcus Chen, who I knew would be available despite the late hour. Marcus had been managing my interests for 9 years and knew exactly what to do when I called during family situations. Marcus, it's Daniel. I'm at dinner with the Montgomery family and something interesting has developed. Could you pull the current ownership structure for Montgomery Pharmaceuticals? Yes, right now. I'll wait. James frowned. What does your attorney have to do with anything? Everything, I said simply. Then Marcus was back, and I switched the phone to speaker. Marcus, could you please explain to everyone present the current ownership structure of Montgomery Pharmaceuticals? Marcus's voice filled the dining room, professional and precise. Certainly. Montgomery Pharmaceuticals has 120 million shares outstanding. The largest shareholder is DC Capital Holdings, which owns 62.4 million shares, representing 52% of the company. The next largest shareholder is James Montgomery personally, with 19.2 million shares, or 16%. The remaining 32% is distributed among various institutional and individual investors. James was staring at the phone like it was speaking an alien language. What is this? What does any of this? Marcus, I interrupted, could you please explain who owns DC Capital Holdings? DC Capital Holdings is wholly owned by Daniel Carter. It was established 9 years ago using an inheritance and has been the primary investment vehicle for Mr. Carter's portfolio. The current value of the Montgomery Pharmaceuticals position is approximately $14.3 billion at today's closing price. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't shock or awkwardness. This was the sound of an entire worldview collapsing. Sarah's mouth had fallen open. Patricia had gone completely pale. James looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "I don't understand," James said finally, his voice barely audible. I picked up the check and held it toward him. "This is $750,000. You're offering me $750,000 to walk away from Sarah." I let that hang in the air. "James, I own 52% of your company. At current valuations, my position is worth $14.3 billion. Do you understand what that means?" "It means," Marcus's voice came through the speaker, "that Mr. Carter is the controlling shareholder of Montgomery Pharmaceuticals. He has absolute majority voting control. In practical terms, Daniel Carter could remove James Montgomery from his CEO position with a simple majority shareholder vote at any board meeting." James's face had gone from pale to crimson. "This is impossible. DC Capital Holdings is... I thought it was..." "You thought it was an institutional investor," I finished. "Some faceless hedge fund or pension fund. You never asked questions because the capital kept flowing when you needed it desperately. 9 years ago, your company was drowning in debt from failed trials. You couldn't secure traditional financing because everyone knew you'd overextended. So when a mysterious investor started buying your distressed shares and providing capital for your research, you didn't look too closely at where it was coming from." I stood up, walking around the table until I was standing directly in front of James. "Every major drug development you've completed in the past 9 years was financed with capital I provided. The Cardiomax trial, my money. The Neuraxis acquisition, my money. The biotech partnerships that saved your company during the 2016 downturn, all my money." Patricia found her voice finally. "But you're a research chemist. You live in that small townhouse. You drive that terrible car." "I am a research chemist," I confirmed. "I consult for pharmaceutical companies on biochemical analysis. That's not a lie. It's simply not the complete truth. The townhouse is modest because Sarah and I chose modest. The car runs perfectly. I don't need to prove anything to anyone through displays of wealth." Sarah was crying now, but not from sadness, from anger. "You've been watching this whole time," she said. "Watching them treat you like garbage, knowing you could destroy them with one phone call." "I could have," I agreed. "But I wanted to know who they really were. I wanted to see how far they'd go when they thought they had all the power. Turns out pretty far." I looked at James, who was still frozen. "James," I said quietly. "I didn't know," he started, his voice shaking. "You have to understand." "Would it have mattered?" I asked. "If I was actually who you thought I was, would this offer be any less insulting? Would trying to buy me away from your daughter be any more justified?" Patricia was crying now too, mascara streaming down her carefully made-up face. "We were just trying to protect Sarah." "Protect her?" I laughed without humor. "You were trying to control her. There's a significant difference." I pulled out my phone and opened my email. With a few taps, I sent a message I'd had drafted for months. I just sent an email to the board of directors of Montgomery Pharmaceuticals, calling for an emergency meeting Monday morning. The agenda is simple: a vote on the current CEO's position. James stood abruptly. "You can't do this. The board will support me. They know what I've built." "They know what we've built together," I corrected. "And they also know that 52% of voting shares support new leadership. I've already spoken with key institutional shareholders. When we vote Monday, you'll be removed as CEO. The board will install an interim executive team while we search for permanent replacement." "But this is my company," James shouted, his composure completely shattered. "I built this from nothing." "No," I said quietly. "You built it to the edge of bankruptcy. I saved it. And I did it while you were treating me like I wasn't worth acknowledging at your dinner table." I turned to Sarah, who was staring at me like seeing me for the first time. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I wanted to tell you 1,000 times, but I needed to know if your family would ever accept me for who I am, not what I have. Tonight gave me that answer." "Nathan," she whispered, "why? Why let them humiliate you when you could have just told them?" "Because humiliation is temporary. Character is permanent. Your parents showed me tonight exactly who they are. They offered me money to abandon the person I love most in this world. They valued their social status more than your happiness. I needed you to see that too." I picked up the check one final time and tore it cleanly in half. "I don't want your money, James. I never did. I wanted to be part of a family. I wanted to prove I could love your daughter without caring about her last name or her inheritance. But you couldn't see that. All you could see was someone you thought was beneath you. Marcus, I said into the phone, proceed with board notifications. I looked at James, collapsed back into his chair. I looked at Patricia, clutching her pearls. And I looked at Sarah, who deserved better than parents who measured love in dollar signs. It's time for new leadership. The end. The drive home was silent for the first 15 minutes. Sarah sat in my terrible Subaru staring out at Boston's lights. Finally, she spoke. How long have you been planning this? I wasn't planning anything, I said honestly. I bought into your father's company years before I met you. It was a sound investment. Meeting you, falling in love, that was pure chance. Beautiful, unexpected chance. But you could have told me, any time in 4 years. I could have, I agreed. But would you have believed I married you for you? Not for family connections? Would you have believed I loved you for who you are, not what you represented? She was quiet for a long time. I don't know, she admitted finally. Maybe not at first. I wanted you to know beyond any doubt that I chose you when I had nothing to gain. I wanted your family to reveal who they really were. Tonight, they did. What happens now? She asked. To my father's company. To my parents. The company will be fine, I assured her. Better than fine. I'm installing professional management who actually understand pharmaceutical development. Your father will be offered a consulting position if he wants it, though with significantly reduced authority. And my parents? I sighed. That's your choice, Sarah. They're your parents. I won't force you to choose between them and me, but I won't pretend what they did tonight was acceptable. She reached over and took my hand. I choose you. I've always chosen you. Even when I thought you were just a chemist with a Subaru and modest dreams. Especially then. Why especially then? Because that version of you loved me without any expectation of gain. That version chose me when you thought I was just a non-profit worker with judgmental parents. That's real, Daniel. That's what matters. We pulled into our townhouse complex, the modest building that had been home for 4 years. Tomorrow, I could buy us a penthouse if we wanted. We could move to Brookline ourselves, live in an estate that would make James and Patricia's place look small. But looking at Sarah in the dim light, I realized we didn't need any of that. We're keeping the townhouse, I said suddenly. She smiled for the first time since dinner. Yeah, maybe we'll buy it instead of renting. But I like our life, Daniel. I like being normal. I like proving happiness doesn't require a mansion or luxury car or impressing people who aren't worth impressing. What about the money? She asked. $14 billion is substantial to just ignore. We're not ignoring it. We're doing something meaningful. You're going to expand your foundation. We're going to fund cancer research that actually helps people. And maybe, if we're feeling generous, we'll create a scholarship fund for science students who can't afford graduate school. Students like you would have been. Students like I would have been if my uncle hadn't left me that inheritance. Yes, that Monday the board meeting went exactly as predicted. James was removed as CEO with an 81% vote in favor. He sat at the conference table's end, diminished and humiliated, while board members who'd spent years flattering him now voted to strip his power. Patricia called Sarah 23 times that day. Sarah let every call go to voicemail. The next day, a letter arrived via certified mail. Inside was a handwritten note from Patricia. Sarah, I don't expect you to forgive us. What we did was unforgivable. But I need you to know we thought we were protecting you. We thought Daniel was using you. We were wrong. So terribly, horribly wrong. Your father is devastated. Not about the company, though that hurts. About losing you. About discovering that the son-in-law he dismissed is the man who saved everything he built. Please, when you're ready, can we talk? I promise. No more envelopes. No more checks. Just a mother who wants to understand the man her daughter married. Sarah read the letter twice, then set it on the counter. Do you think they mean it? I think they're scared, I said. And sometimes fear makes people honest in ways comfort never could. What would you do? I thought about that. I'd give them one chance, but on our terms, in our home, without the performance of wealth and status. If they can accept us as we actually are, maybe there's hope. Sarah picked up her phone and typed a response. Dinner. Our place. This Friday. No dress code. No expectations. Just family. She showed me before sending. Too harsh? Perfect, I said. That Friday, James and Patricia arrived looking smaller somehow. James wore jeans and a sweater. Patricia wore slacks and minimal makeup. They'd left their armor at home. Daniel, James said when I answered the door. Thank you for seeing us. We sat around our small dining table, eating pasta Sarah had made. No servers, no crystal, no performance. Just 4 people trying to rebuild something broken. I owe you an apology, James said finally. Several apologies. For every dinner where I made you feel small. For every comment about your job or your car. For that check. He stopped, voice breaking. For treating you like you were worth exactly $750,000 when you were the man who saved my company and loved my daughter. I appreciate that, I said carefully. But the apology I really need to hear is the one you give Sarah. She's the one you tried to control. She's the one whose happiness you valued less than your social status. James turned to his daughter, tears forming. Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't see what you saw in Daniel. I'm sorry I made you feel like your choice wasn't good enough. You found a man who loves you for who you are, who didn't need your money or your name. That's what every father should want. I almost destroyed it because of my pride. Patricia reached across and took Sarah's hand. I spent your whole life preparing you for a certain kind of life, a certain kind of marriage. When you chose differently, I felt like you were rejecting everything I'd taught you. But you weren't rejecting anything. You were choosing something real over something hollow. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. Sarah was crying now, but didn't pull her hand away. Do you mean it? Because I can't go through another night like last Saturday. I can't watch you treat Daniel like he's not good enough when he's the best man I've ever known. We mean it, James said firmly, and we're prepared to prove it. Daniel, I'd like to take you to lunch this week. Just us. I want to learn about your investment philosophy, your strategy, everything I should have been asking about for 4 years instead of dismissing you. I looked at Sarah, who nodded slightly. Lunch sounds good, I said. But James, I need you to understand something. I didn't buy into your company to control or hurt you. I did it because it was a sound investment. I'm not going to apologize for being good at something you didn't know I could do. I wouldn't expect you to, he replied. I'm just hoping you'll teach me how you did it, because apparently I've been running a company without understanding who really kept it alive. 3 months later, Montgomery Pharmaceuticals announced major restructuring. James remained on the board as senior advisor, but operations were handled by a professional team that turned the company around completely. Stock price climbed 47% since the management change. Sarah's foundation received a $75 million grant from the Carter Family Foundation I'd established. We funded cancer research, scholarships, and initiatives helping people where I'd been 9 years ago, talented, driven, but without resources to prove it. James and Patricia came to dinner every other week. They'd learned to leave expectations at the door and just be Sarah's parents instead of Brookline Society figures. James even started driving a Toyota, joking that if a billionaire could be happy in a Subaru, he could downsize from his BMW. The hidden billionaire story made business news for a few weeks, but I refused most interviews. What happened at that dinner table wasn't content for Bloomberg or Financial Times. It was personal. It was about family, values, what matters when you strip away the performance of wealth. One night, about 6 months after that fateful dinner, Sarah and I were on our townhouse balcony watching the city lights. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Letting them humiliate you for so long when you could have just told the truth. Not once, I said, honestly. Because now I know. I know your parents love you more than their pride. I know you chose me for me. And I know I don't need anyone's permission to be exactly who I am. Who are you? She asked, smiling. I'm Daniel Carter. I'm a research chemist. I'm a billionaire investor. I'm your husband. And I'm the guy who proved that the most powerful people in any room are usually the ones nobody's paying attention to. She kissed me then, and the city sparkled below like possibilities we hadn't imagined yet. Somewhere across town, James was probably working late, learning his company from the ground up like the student he'd needed to be all along. Somewhere in their mansion, Patricia was probably planning their next dinner at our place, making sure not to dress too formally. And here, in our modest townhouse we'd chosen deliberately, Sarah and I were rich in the only ways that mattered. We had each other, we had truth, and we had a future built on something more solid than money could buy. Because at the end of the day, the envelope wasn't what changed everything. The check for $750,000 wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the moment when people showed you who they really were, and what you chose to do with that information. I chose love. I chose honesty. And I chose to prove that being underestimated is sometimes the greatest advantage you can have. Because when nobody's expecting you to win, victory tastes that much sweeter. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm the anonymous investor who saved my father-in-law's company while he tried to pay me to leave his daughter. And this is the story of how I learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's living well. It's choosing integrity over retaliation. It's building something real, while everyone else is busy building illusions. James Montgomery tried to buy me for $750,000. What he didn't know was that I'd already bought his respect. It just took him 4 years and one devastating dinner to realize it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe.